Standard Charter, Mr. President.
Okay, and when you're ready?
Ready?
Okay, go for it.
Mrs. Pipilia, can you tell me about your childhood, where and when you were born, and your recollections of the Phoenix settlement in the early days?
Okay. So I was born on the 19th of October, 1928, at the Phoenix settlement. And it was then quite a jungle, you know. We had these highways and recently built, but we had, you know, rough roads and hills and valleys and all that. So it's 15 miles now, but it was more than 15 miles then, you know, going through hills and valleys and all that. And so recently it was like that. And there's one story that my mother always told me, that when she was pregnant, you know, she had to tell the midwife that, you know, she's due certain time and she must be available then. And then my mother went into labor. So my father sent the car for the midwife. And as I see, the roads were rough and all that. So it took time, and my mother was in advanced labor. And so my father, he had this love for medicine. He wanted to be a doctor always. But my grandfather didn't believe in modern education, so he didn't educate him. So he read up medical encyclopedias and all. So he followed the books, and he actually delivered me. When the midwife came, she was, you know, had to bath the baby and see if the cord was cut and all that. So I was born like that in 1928, and the midwife was just a bit late. And then, you know, when I was pregnant for the first time in Durban, I worked at the hospital, and I didn't want to go to hospital. I had seen terrible things at the labor ward. So I booked the same midwife that was to have delivered me. And when in the morning I told my husband, you know, I think it's time now, and I must call Sister Lola, her name was. So we sent for her, and she came and had a look at me, and she said, it's a first baby, and, you know, it will take time, maybe this afternoon. And you know, she went away. And I was very worried. I was alone. Nobody was with me except neighbors. And so I was very worried. I didn't know what sort of pain do I, you know, will I have, that it's the right pain. And I was very nervous as well. So Sister Lola, I think, remembered, you know, my birth. And she phoned her partner, who stayed near my flat. And she told her that, you know what, I am sure that it's going to take some time for her to be born, you know, to give birth, but just go and see her. I don't want history repeating itself. And in this case, nobody would have been there. So she sent the sister. And sister came and she said, you know, I don't know how Sister Lola told you that you are going to it's going to be a long labor because you are ready to deliver. And she was there, so, you know, it nearly have history repeating itself. So I was born in Phoenix, and my early memories, you know, of Phoenix settlement, it was a very homely place. We were like a large family. You know, it was a jungle, actually. We didn't have any mod cons over there. But I never felt that I lived in a jungle, you know, except when I came to school and it rained or the bridges got washed off or something like that. But other than that, it was the people who worked in the Phoenix settlement stayed there on the Phoenix settlement. So there's a lot of activity. The press itself was active, and my mother helped in the press. After she got married in 1927 at the age of 21, and she came to South Africa for the first time. She left her home. She didn't know any other language except our vernacular. And so she took the vernacular side of the press and learned herself first. And then she taught the workers the vernacular. You had to set types and no machines to set, hand-set types, hand-set machines in printing and all that. So the press was active from Monday to Saturday, as early as I can recall, even 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. I knew that I used to tag along with my mother, go to the press. And the press was a bit far. It's not the press that is there now. That was, the ruins are there. It's International Printing Press there. The press was in the beginning of Phoenix Settlement. As you enter Phoenix Settlement, that was the press there, the original press. And it was just a wood and iron building, so we broke it down later, and then we made a press at the top, nearer the house. So that's what I remember, that, growing up in a farm with animals, because my father was very fond of animals. He had cows and horses and donkeys and everything. We had our own milk. My mother kept herself occupied with the, milk, and then making cream and, separating the butter and everything. And then the surrounding Africans came and bought the milk from us. And so we had a lot of cows, and, my father taught us how to milk the cows. And it was in a very active life, though it was in a jungle. And I was the only child for 6 years. 6 years later, my brother was born. So, but I wasn't lonely, and it was a good family life that I had. And, the workers themselves were like part of our family, because they were young boys when I was born. And then they grew up to be young men, and then they got married on the settlement. My father had their wedding on the settlement, and then they brought their brides and they built a home and stayed there. Till then they used to eat with us and all that. And till now, two families were there till now, whose grandfather worked for us. And I think, I don't know, because as far as I can remember, the grandfather was the head gardener. And he was very old from the time I remember. So he might have just been when my father was left here, when my grandfather left him. He might have been in those days. I couldn't say how old he was. He looked very old all the time, And in my teens, I think, just before I went to India, when I was 15, he died. So I think he was the oldest person there after my grandfather went, and he lived with my father. And then his family was there, sons, and the sons got married and their children. So till recently, when Phoenix got burnt down, we actually had to save these girls, Because when I heard that there's trouble in Nanda, I phoned them and said, how are things with you? Because in 1948 we had riots with Indians, and blacks. And the blacks actually came to the Phoenix settlement and told us that they will not touch us, we mustn't worry about it, because they know that this is a important place and a religious place. So when my father was there, people knew that it was a particular place, and had religious significance. And they assured us that they would not harm us in any way. And all the people surrounding came and stayed the night over there. And some of the bus owners brought their buses there. And when they brought the buses, then the Africans came and told us that if these people are going to leave their buses here, then there's going to be trouble because they're going to burn the buses. So, I didn't even dream that something terrible is going to happen to Phoenix. But I just phoned, to find out from this girl whose father was a composer, typesetting for all his life in Phoenix settlement. And then when we closed down the press, we asked him if he wanted a job somewhere else, and he said he's quite happy there. He worked for us and he doesn't want to work for anybody. And he lived there with his 6 children. So his daughter used to look after the settlement, all of the settlement, when nobody was there. So she was living in the house, my mother's house. And so when I phoned, they said they were very worried because they had no delivery of bread, milk or anything. And, if I could send something. And when I found from the police, they said nobody's allowed to go on that road. And then the next morning, then I phoned Ismail Mir and Mewa and all that, because they were trustees, and I told them that, these people, it's dangerous for them because they're youngsters. Nobody is responsible for them. So you should do something. And they said they're monitoring the situation and all that. And so the next morning, I got up and first thing I phoned them. And they told me that there was a big rumpus in the house and things bashing and breaking and people shouting, and these girls are crying and said, please send us a car or please get us out of this, because they were leaving the next morning and they hijacked their whole van, the furniture, everything, and they were breaking up the house. And that's how those girls, then I had to phone the police because they said it's a private property and are you a trustee or, I said I'm the daughter of the place, but I'm not in any official position. But I know that there are 3-4 people who need to be saved there. I've just spoken to them, and I'll appreciate it if you go to the place and get them out. So they didn't want to go, and I wanted to send my son with them. And they said, no, we don't want to be responsible for him. We'll go there, then we don't want to know about police brutality, and, if they sort of start with the police, we're going to just take these girls out and go and put them in the Phoenix Township. So that's how they just got out, and they were, that time they were breaking up the place. And we got these girls out. And for the first time, they knew what is to live outside Phoenix settlement,
Okay. You've actually gone on.
Yeah, to later, yeah.
But can we just go back to talk
Okay.
about the Gandhi family?
Right.
And the roles of the different family members within the Phoenix settlement.
Okay. You see, my father was left in Phoenix settlement when my grandfather went to India. And he left my father there. And he was only 18 then. And he told him that you have to manage this place now. And you have to stay here. My father was a very obedient son. He never questioned him that why should I stay here at the young age of 18, And there were other trustees like Mr. Kallenbeck, Mr. Rich, Mr. Polak. And they were supervising him. They helped him to run the press. And there were a lot of settlers at that time. And all of them were staying there, so my father stayed on. And after a while, one by one, each person branched off into Durban. I think nearly every press, Indian press that's in Durban originated from Phoenix settlement. Their forefathers were in Phoenix settlement at some stage or the other. And eventually every settler went away and my father was left alone there. And the trustees were there. Mr. Polak went back to London. Mr. Rich was in Johannesburg till very late. I think he died in the 50s somewhere. And so till 50s he was there, but he was not very well, but he helped us. Now and then when my father went overseas and all that, he helped us to write the editorial. So those people kept in touch with us. Miss Lezin, my grandfather's secretary, she was a school teacher. She taught in Johannesburg. So she kept in touch with us. And but my father was essentially left alone in Phoenix settlement. And so he ran the press and he ran it was 100 acres of land. So to the best of ability, he cultivated the land. And when he was 30 years old in 1927, he wrote to my grandfather that now he thinks he wants to marry. So he wants to marry whoever my grandfather chooses. So my grandfather said to him that, do you want me to choose the girl? So he said, I will marry anybody you choose. So at that stage, the India struggle was going on, and my maternal grandfather's family were involved in this struggle as well, the whole family. And my mother's uncle was staying in the colony that Bapuji, my grandfather, had in India. He was staying there, so he told my grandfather that I have a niece and, at marriageable age, and you go and talk to her father. So my grandfather went to my maternal grandfather's home and he met my mother and he liked my mother, and it was just one defect that she was deaf. You had to speak very loud to her, otherwise she couldn't hear anything at all. She had recurring malaria, and an overdose of quinine, I think. So the nerves were dead, yes. But she didn't mind that affliction, and so my grandfather wrote to my father and said that I have chosen a girl for you. The only thing is, I must tell you that she is deaf, and if that worries you, then I will not proceed with the talks. So my father said, if it doesn't worry him, it doesn't worry him either, and he accepted, and so he sent for him in 1927, and they got married in India. And then he brought my mother back in 1927. And in 1920, and it was a jungle. She came from a large family, and here she was alone, and she didn't know the African language. She didn't know English, and it was difficult for her to communicate with anybody. And she was only 21 then. But my father gradually taught her things, that if you don't know the language, make signs and, convey yourself, but you have to learn, because these are the people who are working for us over here. And she got on very well, in spite of her hearing problems and all that. And in 28, I was born. And my childhood was spent, till 6 years, it was spent in Phoenix settlement. And then my brother was born. After I was 5.5 when my brother was born. And I just vaguely remember, he was a big crybaby, and my father used to be strong in discipline, And he said, let him cry, he's crying for nothing, push the cot outside, and let him cry. And I, being very protective, because till 5 I didn't have anybody, and then suddenly had a baby in the house, and I cried. I said, how can you let my brother cry outside? And I used to bring him inside and all that. And then it was time for me to school, and no schools were there. So my parents had a problem, and they said, how are we going to cope with the school system now? The schools were all in town. So at one stage, my father hired a room in Short Street where Dr. Naikar, the president of the Indian Congress, Dr. Naikar, he stayed there. And he had a spare room and a kitchen and toilet, bathroom. And my father rented that from him. So my mother, my brother, and I came and stayed here from Monday to Friday, so I could go to St. Anthony's School. And that's how my schooling started. And that's when I can remember, life. At 6 and 7, some things you don't even remember. You've been told, by your mother or father. But I remember very well this when I was 6 that I had to come to town. And we stayed here in this one room and go to school. And my brother was a little baby then. And we just looked forward to going home on Fridays. And then when I was about 8 or 9 years, 1 year or 2 years later, it was a very hectic system for my parents. Because my father, it was, he had to cope up alone in Phoenix. And my mother had at that stage started taking charge of the vernacular section of the paper. So they went back, and then I stayed with the family. Reverend Sundram, he was the priest of the St. Aidan's Church. And he's had a daughter the same age as me. And they were very friendly with my father. So I stayed a couple of years with them from Monday to Friday. And that's how I went to St. Anthony's School. And then later, my father used to send the car for, I used to come by car. And the driver used to bring me. And the first day I went to school, I was in Standard 1, by car. Till then I stayed over here and all. And that day I went by car, and my father, we had to pass the press. And my father was very excited, how she's going to cope up with driving. And I fell out of the car that first day in Red Hill. My door wasn't closed properly. So, I was just chatting with the driver and telling him how wonderful school was and everything, and I just fell out of the car. And lucky there was no traffic at that time, Red Hill and Greenwood Park were like suburbs, very quiet. So when I went home, I was bruised and all that, and my father was so upset. And after that, he had this mania for, seeing that the latch is down, don't sit by the door. And for a number of years, I traveled by car. And then the war came, and petrol was expensive. It was rationed. So I had to travel by train then. And by that time, my brother has also started school. So then I was about 12, 13, so I used to take my brother. We had to walk about 2 miles. My father was very particular about that. It was 2 miles to the main road, from Phoenix Settlement to the main road. And that's on the main road you got the buses and all. So we had to walk those 2 miles in sugarcane fields and all that in the morning to catch a station bus that took you to Duff's Road. Now Duff's Road is Kwamashu actually now. There is a Duff's Road station there still, but it's mostly become a part of Phoenix Township now. But the original Kwamashu now as it is, that was originally Duff's Road. And we had to take the station bus and took us to the Duff's Road station, and we took a train there. And we came to Durban and got off at Greyville station. And then we another half an hour walk to St. Anthony's School. And that's how my schooling days, till I went to India. That's how I went to school. I had to get my brother ready in the morning. My mother, because of her affliction, deaf, she never looked after us, because when she never heard us if we got up, and if we woke her up, then she used to get up in a shock. So my father took care of us mostly when we were very small, and any illnesses and everything, my father just took charge of us. And so he said, you must be you must be self-sufficient, and you mustn't depend on the car to take you to the station. So he made it a practice that, at 6 o'clock in the morning we walked to take a 6:30 bus that took us to the station at 7 o'clock. And we got a train at 7:30 to come into town at about 8 o'clock. And then we walked to school. That's how my school days were. But the days in the farm, I was never lonely, because life was very full. For one thing, the press was all the time going, so people were coming and going. And all of us were involved with the press work. When I was a little girl, I used to put stamps on even, we wrote addresses by hand, wrapped the papers by hand. Can I just put it up?
Just hold it. Okay, when you're ready.
Right, you've mentioned a bit about some of the other residents of the settlement. You mentioned the old the gardener.
Yeah.
Could you tell us about some of the other residents, and if you can remember names in particular, like the gardener's family?
Yeah. Okay. So we had, in general, the gardener was the head man on the Phoenix settlement. He was in charge of the gardening, market gardening, the family gardening. My father was very fond of flowers and all that, so we had a very good garden. And my grandfather also had planted many trees over there. He had planted all the trees that were brought from India, that didn't grow here. He planted those trees as well. So he was the general manager of the settlement. And his family, his first son, was, when he was a teenager, his father put him in the home with my father. But at that time my father wasn't married, so he worked for my father, looked after my father. My father taught him to cook, and so he cooked and made breakfast for my father and made lunch for my father. And when my mother got married and came, he was helping in the kitchen. And then he gradually, when he was a teenager, then my father got him a license. Then he became a driver. Now his name was Munsami. They were Munsami governors, governed the family. And he was Munsami. He was one of the oldest members. Before my mother was married, he was there because his father was there. And then we had Raju and Ramlu. Raju was and Ramlu were doing the typesetting, the English section. So Ramlu traveled from Durban to Phoenix. Came on a Monday morning and he went on Friday. But Raju stayed there with us. And Ramlu also stayed. They had lunch and everything with us. And so they stayed for the week. But Raju always stayed there. Eventually his mother came and stayed there with him. And eventually when he wanted to get married, he told my father and my father had the wedding for them. Even Munsami, he was married on the settlement. Then there was another family, Mr. Lewis. He was the bookkeeper, general manager of the office, and he had his whole family there, a wife and 3 children. And there was an African gentleman also, worked for many years, worked as far as I remember. So I don't know, I don't think he was there in my grandfather's time. But in my father's time, before he got married, he was there, Mr. Alpha in Gobo. And he was with us till he died. And his family also lived on the settlement. And then they bought a little farm in Dwedwe or somewhere. So he put his children and his family there to school. And he used to go every weekends there. But he had the house there. And his family came and stayed there during the holidays. These were the original stuff. And the other people who did the vernacular setting, composing, and those were local guys. I think their fathers had little farms, and they came to work for us. That's when my mother got married, and she taught them how to set, in Gujarati. I mean, they didn't speak Gujarati. They had to be taught the alphabets of Gujarati, Each typesetting, I learned the typesetting eventually, because I helped when we had a special number, like, Diwali number, or somebody died and we had a special issue for them. So I learned that, and you had to set each type, and then you had a proof machine, you made a proof, and then proofreading and all that. So my mother taught these boys, not knowing the language, but they were very proficient in typing. And they worked all their lives for us till Phoenix settlement closed down. And they eventually opened a press here in Durban. And I think their family members, the brothers have since died who worked for us. But their sons are there, and they're running, it's called Coastal Printing Works. So these are the original stuff that were there. But they didn't live on the settlement. They just lived outside the settlement. Settlement was the highway that's going through now, and you turn into Phoenix settlement, was not there. It was just sugarcane farms. Now it's leveled. But if you have any old pictures of Phoenix settlement, we came down a hill, of all sugarcane fields. And we came the rough road, and that's the car road also, about a mile to the main road. We had to turn off, off the main road and take this rough road, and then we came down a hill, and then these 2 trees. It's just a very beautiful entrance to Phoenix settlement. 2 trees intermingled, and there's a little bridge there. And that was the entrance of the Phoenix settlement. And as you entered, the original press was there, as you entered. And the whole press was there. And we had a well that my grandfather started that well. And when my father took over, he put in pipes. So we had running water through that well. We had many taps all over, and that well never went dry, but it was not drinkable water. It was very salty, so it was not drinkable, but for other purposes, washing dishes, Drinking water we had to store in a tank. All our houses had tanks, so rainwater stored in tanks. And these were the people that stayed with us they got married on the settlement. This person that I talk about, Raju, even died on the settlement. He's buried on the settlement, and his grave is demolished also. with the squatters. We don't even know where the grave is anymore. And that family stayed there. And the Munsami family, his family stayed there till Phoenix was invaded, and they had to go. The children started working. Munsami's children were quite grown up. So in between he went away. He was driving for us, and he had a bit of a temper, and in between he went to the war. He went and joined up. So we didn't have him for about 3-4 years. And then he came back from the war and came back to us. And he was like a driver. He drove my father around. My father's eyesight was very bad. And so he preferred somebody driving him. So Munsami always drove my father around. So these are the stuff that we had. Now, like Munsami.
Okay, when you're ready.
The people who are associated with the settlement during your grandfather's time, people like Sonia Schlesing, Herman Kallenbach, the Rustamjis, what contact did they have with Phoenix settlement after your grandfather left?
After my grandfather left, then they went into their different fields of, whatever they were qualified. Mr. Kallenbach was an architect, so he opened an office in Durban, and he had a flat in the beachfront. And Miss Lezin was a teacher, so she went to Johannesburg, and she was staying in Johannesburg. Mr. Rich was also associated with the press, and he was in Johannesburg. And now and then he wrote a leading article for the press. Miss Lezin spent all the holidays with us. Rustamjis, the both brothers and their families, were regular visitors to Phoenix settlement. Though the one Rustamji, Surabji Rustamji, and his politics and my father's politics were different. In those days, the Natal Indian Congress and the Natal Indian Organization, there were two parties, and so they didn't hit it off very well. They were at loggerheads, but families, we were always together. Either they were weekends in Phoenix, most of them were at Phoenix on the weekends. And so we had contact right through with all these people till Mr. Lezin died and Mr. Rich died and Mr. Kallenbach died.
Wow.
Yeah, so so we had I can remember them. I don't think my sister or, my brother would remember them very well. Because when I went to India, I was 15 years old. By that time, my brother was in school. My sister hadn't started school yet. And so they were schooling. They were not involved with the work of the settlement.
There's the story of Kallenbach's visits to the settlement when your father at least was growing tobacco. Could you tell us about that?
Yes, Mr. Kallenbach was a very nice man, a very loving and affectionate man, but he was a very strict man. As far as I remember, my memories of him, that I was terrified of him. And he was, so this I remember very clearly, that my father, we had to make the press pay, and it was bound down by so many restrictions. You couldn't take any advertisements, even wedding advertisements, because it was not it was for politics. This paper was History of Indians in South Africa, and today that paper is being used as a as a book for every law that was passed against the Indians was published in the paper. And so my grandfather didn't hesitate to tell my father that he will not change the policies of that paper, and you can't take advertisements for that paper. If you can't run it, you must shut it down. He was very strict about that. So my father went into different ways of, he let the surrounding area, we were 100 acres of land, and then there's farms around us, and there was always a fear of squatters coming in. So the surrounding areas, right round, we let it to Natal Estates for years. The Natal Estates had the surrounding area, 5 acres of the surrounding area, circling us. They planted sugarcane, and they looked after that place, so there was no fear of squatters coming in. And it was just cancelled just before Phoenix got burnt down. But till then, that was there. Then my father went into market gardening as well. And so somebody told him that, if you plant tobacco, it's good money in tobacco. So my father didn't think about the long-term uses of tobacco. He just thought, tobacco I plant, and what happens to it afterwards, he didn't think about it. That cigarettes are made, and he just didn't think about it, and he thought that this will bring revenue, because night and day he was worried to bring revenue to the press. Whatever we made on the farm was used up in the press, paying the people, all the machines and things running the whole settlement. So he planted this tobacco, and then Mr. Kallenbach was regular in his visits, every weekend he came. And he spent the whole day, and he would walk into the farm, and he looked at everything. And he had a house there. When the old press was there, as I said, when you entered Phoenix settlement, the old press was there. And next to the old press, it was his house there. And he left that house to me, 2 acres of land and the house. So I was very proud when I was growing up, that I told everybody that this is my house. Mr. Kallenbach left it to me. And so Mr. Kallenbach said, what have you planted? So my father said, somebody told me that tobacco will bring in a lot of money. So I planted tobacco. So Mr. Kallenbach was in a rage. He said, are you thinking, what do you do with tobacco? Do you advertise cigarettes? You're encouraging people to smoke, and that's against our principles. How can you plant tobacco? And he just took a match and he lit it, and he burnt 10 acres of tobacco. And that put an end to my father's, mass growing things. Then he just went to market gardening. He got a gardener, good gardener. And you had to supervise that, but both my parents were good gardeners, green fingers. After his press, he always worked, and before, in the mornings, he always worked in the farm, around the house, for the house, domestic uses. So my grandfather had already planted a lot of trees for beautiful, to make it look beautiful, but trees that were useful. We had every type of mango tree in the settlement. There were just groves of mango trees, about 100 trees. And every tree had produced a different mango. So we had a big quantity of mangoes in the season. And we sold that, We sold that to one farmer. We just sold the trees to the one farmer, that you come and take the mangoes and sell it, because we had to employ somebody else to do that. So that was big business, but those trees were planted by my grandfather. And then we had guava trees and, matungulas and fruit trees, mandarins and nachis actually. Mandarins didn't grow here, but nachis. And those were all the trees that were started by the settlers. And my father continued to, you know, look after them. And that's where the money came from. And then my grandfather also had cows, and my father carried on with the cows. So we had about 2-3 cows, and they gave us milk every evening and morning. So we had our own milk, and there was surplus. We made it into mass, and the surrounding Africans came and bought the mass. That also went to the press, towards the press, because it was very hard to keep up the press. One of my father's good friends, he became one of his trustees on the settlement, Mr. Chowda from Cape Town. He died recently, and he was a great friend of my father's and mother's from years before I was born. And so he donated us a plant for lights. And by that time, the old press, we had done away with the old press because it was falling to pieces. So, and it was quite far, because the house was up there. We had to walk about half a mile to the press. And it was infested with snakes. As far as I can remember, I saw a snake. That's my memory of Phoenix, is snakes. And since I can remember, I saw snakes, and I was the one to see the snakes in the house, outside, and poisonous snakes. And so my father decided that when we do away with this press, then we bring it nearer to the house. Because in the night we walk to the press, and it's a gamble we take, We're just lucky that we never bitten by snakes.
Can I just charge the battery in the microphone?
Take it when you're ready. You want to ask the question?
What sort of influence did your grandfather have on the settlement after he'd returned to India?
Well, it had a great influence on my father. My father lived to the word and letter of my grandfather's principles. He never wavered from that. But it was a bit difficult for us as children. We grew up, we knew that grandfather was a great man in India, but he wasn't great here, because I went to a Roman Catholic school and I heard about what a terrible man he was. He didn't want to take part in the war when Britain was fighting Hitler. And even his relationships got strained with the Jews because of that. Mr. Kallenbach, Ms. Rezin, Mr. Rich, their relationship was strained with our family.
Okay, let's just hold it there. Okay, and put that there.
So actually, with the three of us, I suffered the most because I was growing up when there was a war, and I was going to a British school. That was the best school, St. Anthony's School, run by nuns. And I would hear every day what a terrible grandfather I had, who stopped people aiding the war effort. And the war was very near South Africa. So I couldn't understand it, I was 13, 14, and I couldn't understand why my grandfather, when war, we had blackouts here, we had air raid practices here, some boats, always came via South Africa, all the army ships and soldiers and all, There was an atmosphere of war. And in North Africa, there was war. So it was very close to home, and I couldn't understand why we didn't help the war effort. So now each morning I went to school And we had this nun speaking to us. So many teachers, families used to be in war. I remember 2 teachers, 3 sons were in war, and one teacher whose husband was in the war. And we felt very sorry for them because at one stage all 3 sons were, prisoners of war, and she didn't know whether they are alive or dead, where they were, And then we had this war effort that was going on. And I couldn't understand that. My father said, we don't do anything. And my father, he could have, I still say that he could have stretched my grandfather's principles in this country, stretched it, because it was very near us, the war. And how can we ignore the war? And later even I thought about the Jews, we had so many Jewish friends, and every Jewish friend had somebody in the concentration camp. And terrible things that we see, and how could we not just shut our eyes to that? What is more important than that? And that question is still in my mind. So, now we had to have the war effort. And I knitted very well because my mother taught me to knit, and then the sisters taught me to knit. So during the war we had to knit for the soldiers. So I knitted in the train, and then I hid the knitting in my bag until I got back in the train the next morning, and I carried on with my war effort in that way. And I used to question my father at that time, that why. My father didn't question anything that my grandfather said. Never.
Okay, can we just hold it? Okay, when you're ready.
Your family visited India on several occasions. Do you recall your grandmother and grandfather during those earlier visits?
Yeah, the first visit, I went when I was 1 year old, and I was told that I became very ill throughout my visit to India, and that was my first visit. They took me to see my grandfather, show me to my grandfather, and when he saw me, that's what my mother tells me, that they went straight to his ashram, Sevagram ashram. And he said, this is the second Kastur. Kasturba was my grandmother. She looks second Kastur we've got in the house. And then I got very ill and I stayed with my maternal grandfather. And at that time my father went to the salt march, the famous salt march. That's the only time he took part in. He had a craving to work with my grandfather, but he never even dreamt about questioning my grandfather, why he had to stay in South Africa, because his heart was there. And so when we went there, he joined the salt march, and he was with my grandfather, and then he was the ones who were beaten, with sticks and all. He had all his life he had marks on his back. And he spent time in prison, 2 months. And that's when I was very ill. My mother also wanted to join up because all of her family was involved in the freedom struggle. Her sisters, brothers, everybody. And only she, but my grandfather told her that you must not take part because you have to look after a child. And then I got very ill. And I had double pneumonia. I got something on my leg. It was bothering me, and it was osteoporosis, something to do with the bone. And I was very ill, and my grandfather even said that I don't think this girl is going to pull the night through. So he made the request. Then I missed my father because my father always did things for us, at even that early age. Bottles and everything my father did for us. So, I missed him a lot, and when I was ill, I must be crying for him. So they asked the police inspector to release my father too, because my grandfather told them that his child is not going to live. And my father was very upset, and they refused to release him. But then I, turned the danger point. They found this, I had still big operation on my leg. I mean, at 1 year, I had such a big operation on my leg. And, took out part of the bone from my leg. And so I turned the corner, and then we were back. As soon as we came back to South Africa, my health improved, and I was well again. So that was my first visit, and then I was 7 years old. Now, when I was 7 years old, and my brother was 2, or 1.5, and we went by ship. And that was in itself a holiday, going by ship. We enjoyed the ship with sailors all of. So, people who didn't enjoy sea voyage, they were miserable for 15 days or 14 days. But we had a nice time. And that was in itself a holiday. And then we went to, and then I had a very big maternal family. My mother's brothers and her cousins all lived together, because cousins' parents were dead, and so my grandmother and grandfather brought them up. So they all lived in one big house, and so I had many uncles and aunties, and my mother was the only one who had children or who was married, So everyone waited for us to come to spoil us and all. And then we went to the ashram where my grandfather stayed. And then my grandmother used to, she was the only person who ever questioned him or crossed him. And when we went there, she had a little hut of her own, and otherwise there was communal eating, the ashram, like the kibbutz, and very simple eating, no spices, no nothing, just boiled food and all that. But she would make sweets and everything and call me and my brother inside her hut and leave your grandfather. He doesn't believe in all that, but you are my grandchildren. How often can I see you all? And this is what I remember my grandmother telling me. Don't worry, because we were worried about my grandfather, If we ate some things that others were not eating there, and there would be trouble. Because he never made a distinguish between grandchildren and other children on the ashram. We were all the same. If he walked like this, this picture, we had turns. It wasn't that I was a granddaughter and I could walk every day with him like that. Just turns. And everybody got a turn. So, but my grandmother said, you don't worry about that. I'll speak to your grandfather if he questions me. But my grandfather never, he knew that she gave us sweets and homemade things she made herself. That's the memory of my grandmother that I had. And then when I was 15, she died. She just died a year before that. So my father even was, he led a very lonely life. At the age of 18, he was left here. And it must have been very lonely for him, He married at the age of 30. So for 12 years, he was alone with just the workers, So he had a very lonely life, and he was a very affectionate man. And he cared a lot about his father. When we went there, I knew that he used to take over the massaging and pressing his legs and everything that had to be done for my grandfather. He just took it over and it was a labor of love, He just wanted to do that for him, to be with him for that time. So these are the memories that I have when just that once with my grandmother when I was 7 years old. And then we had letters. My grandfather regularly wrote to us letters. Then my mother used to teach us the vernacular, so we learned the vernacular, and this is the way we learned. Other children, like my granddaughter, has gone to a vernacular school now, but we learned through my mother. She made us write letters to both my grandfathers, and that's how I learned the vernacular. And she made me read books, and then my mother went into selling books, importing books from India, Gujarati books, and she had a big selection of books that she sold to people over here to make an income for the Indian opinion. So that's how I wrote to my grandfather, and he wrote to me. And all the letters now are given to the Gandhi Memorial Trust. The only thing I've got is the Gita that he presented to me when I was 17 years old. And he wrote in there that, I must take inspiration from the Gita in times of trouble and make my Sanskrit, because when I did my matric in India, against his wishes, of course, he didn't want me to study, like he didn't let my parents study, my father. He didn't want me to study too. He said, you must learn cottage industries. India is a land of villages. You must learn spinning, weaving, cottage industries, gardening. And I wasn't much of a gardener. Even staying in Phoenix, I wasn't much of a gardener. I had this fear of snakes. And I told my father, I'll do everything. My father was also tough. He made us work. We had so many people working for us, but nobody working in the house. All of us, even my brother, had to do things in the house, like toilet cleaning, and we had the bucket system in the beginning. Then we had the septic tank, but while we had the bucket system, we had to clean it. He said, nobody is going to clean it. And my grandfather did the same thing with my grandmother, if you read the book. And it's in this Making of the Mahatma. There's an episode there. That was a big thing, and it was a big thing for us too, because nobody liked it. But we had to do it. He said, that's why you have to do it. And so my grandfather had a big influence on my father, except that he wanted us to study. My father wanted us to study, because he never forgot that he didn't study, and he wanted to be something. My elder uncle wanted to be something, and he actually had a fight with my grandfather, and he left home. And he left home for good.
Which one will you go? Okay, go for it when you're ready.
Yeah, okay.
Right. Could you tell us about the period that you spent at the Sivagram ashram with your grandfather?
So I was telling you how difficult it was in wartime with me in school. I was a very mixed up child. I questioned my father, but I was frightened to question my father. So I didn't cross the nuns, and I didn't cross my father, and kept them both happy. But I was very mixed up what type of man was my grandfather, because it was all hearsay. I hear from my parents that it's a great man. I mean, big sacrifices, and then I hear from the nuns. So my father says, I think I must go and leave you in India. And I was very worried about that, because, to leave family and at such a young age, I'm barely 15 then. I just started high school. I was in girls' high. I left the convent school and went to girls' high. And he said that you have heard everything negative about your grandfather, and it's making more impression on you, because in that period he disowned my uncle as well, publicly disowned him. He had trouble with him, eldest uncle, Harilal. He publicly disowned him, and then he became a Muslim and all. And those stories I didn't hear till today. Nobody ever mentioned my uncle by name in front of my grandfather, though his grandchildren came and all that, but he was never mentioned. So, when I heard from outside that, we said he was a terrible man, he disowned your uncle. And so, I couldn't understand all these things, that he's such a kind man. He taught you good things and then disowned his own son. And then he became a Muslim for a while. That was politics, all my grandfather's enemies wanted to convert him, so he became a Muslim. And once my grandfather disowned him, who would own him? Nobody would keep up with him. There was an incident where when he was still having problems with my grandfather from teenagers, and that's when he went from here. And he told my grandfather, I don't want to stay with you, because he had his differences that he wanted to study. And my grandfather wouldn't let him study. So he went away in a huff. And then my father went to India, and he thought, my grandfather gave him 100 rand, 100 pounds for spending. So my father thought, I don't need all this money. He was 16 then. And he went to India to visit family and everybody. And his brother was there. He was also already married, and a couple of children he had. And he was having a rough time, so he thought, I'll give 50 pounds to my brother, and I'll keep the 50 pounds with me. And so he went and had a good holiday and everything, and came back. And my grandfather was told by others in the settlement that Manilal did this, that he didn't use all the money, but he gave 50 pounds to Harilal. There were these tittle-tattle people, who made trouble for people. People will not even remember those things, but this is to make trouble. So my grandfather told my father that how can you give public money to somebody? It's not your money. But I told my father that, it was your money. He gave you 100 pounds to spend. How you spent it is your business. But he said that you shouldn't have given. And as a punishment, he sent him from Bombay to Madras. He bought him a ticket. And he said, think of what you did, and it was wrong. And you have to go to Madras, you have to live there for 1 year. No recommendations where you're going to go or what you're going to do, and you're not qualified to do anything. So he went and he stayed 1 year in Madras, and then he came home. I never crossed him again. So, that's when my father said that you must go to. So I went with very mixed feelings. First, I went during the war. So, our ship normally takes 14 days. It took 30 days to reach, because half the time we were having the smoke screen, and half the time we had to go back and, take a different route because of mines on the Indian Ocean. And a couple of British India boats were blown up, passenger boats. A number of our friends were lost during the war. So I was terrified. It wasn't like a pleasure trip at all. And then I was leaving my mother, but my father was adamant. He said, now it's time. You're asking too many questions that I don't have answers for. So you should make up your mind with your grandfather and let him influence you. That's why he took me to India. I was just going to Standard 8. In June it was. And I left for India. And all the 30 days I had mixed feelings. I had a mixed feeling that I'm going to meet a dictator who's going to dictate my life. And then I went to Bombay, and the first impression of Bombay was it was so filthy. It was monsoon period, it was raining, and it was dirty, and it made me even more miserable. And then my grandfather had just been released from prison, and so he was recouping in one of the hill stations. So we took a train and went to the hill stations, and that was beautiful, just like Phoenix in the hills, and all plantations and all that, and beautiful scenery, exactly like Phoenix. So I liked it there, and then I met my grandfather for the first time when I was grown up. And, I didn't know who I'm going to meet and, how he'd be with me. But once you met him, you just went under his spell. All the questions I had in my mind about him just disappeared. And he paid special attention to me, though he was still busy working and all that with the independence movement and all, But he gave me some time. He said, you write your first impressions of India and I'll read it. So I wrote how I came to India, and he said that I should continue with my writing because I write very well. And then I stayed about 3 weeks over there in the hill stations with my grandfather. Every day we went for walks. Every evening we went for prayers in the village, and the villagers all came there. So the prayer meetings were very significant there. And I understood my grandfather in those 3 weeks, what he stood for and why my father revered him so much. And you understood most of his things. I did ask him about the Jew question. He said it was a terrible thing, but we helped Britain in the First World War, and they were supposed to do things for us and they didn't do. So then we decided that we're not going to help them in the Second World War. It doesn't mean to say that, I said, but they nearly lost the war and millions of people got killed, and innocent people. So he said he regret, but how many people knew about the Jewish question during the war? Just little bits and pieces were coming out. Nobody knew the real story. That came out much later.
We can pick it up when you're ready.
You're going to ask a question. Right.
Could you tell us a bit about your experiences at the Sevagram ashram?
Yes.
Leading up to the time that your grandfather was assassinated?
Yes, so after the 3 weeks in the hill station, we went to meet my maternal relatives, and my grandfather went to the Sevagram ashram. And then my father left me at the Sevagram ashram. And he told me that I don't want you to study. This is the same pattern that went with my father and my uncle and everything. And he told me that I want you to stay in the ashram and learn cottage industries, working in the villages, teaching them how to be clean and making them aware of health hazards and all that. And well, I wanted to learn spinning and weaving, but I didn't want to. And cottage industries was not a perfected thing at that time. It's just beginning. Very few people were there to teach you anything. So I thought, this is going to be a repeat where my father all his life he felt that he wanted an education and he was not educated. Though he was self-educated. I mean, my grandfather didn't neglect the education that way that they didn't have anything. He told them which books to read. There was a big library in Phoenix till recently when it was burnt down. So I told my grandfather that I was in standard 8 and I would like to finish my matric and then think about further studies. I wanted to have my matric. So he agreed. He let me go to my maternal uncle's place. And of course I had difficulty there. We had the South African system and they had the British system and they didn't recognize it, and I had to appear as an external student. So I had to study from home. So my uncles had good friends, teachers, and also in a year I did my matric. And it was tough because maths was very advanced there, and instead of Latin I had to do Sanskrit. So that was difficult, but I had a very good teacher, and he taught me the whole day maths and Sanskrit. He drummed it into my head, and he said that you have to pass, and you're an external student, you have to pass. And I had to pass because my grandfather had given me the deadline for matric. So I passed, and you had first class, second class. So I had a higher second class. I passed. And then I went to my grandfather in Sevagram. I said, okay, I'll give it a try in cottage industries. So my cousin, one of my other uncles, the third uncle, Ramdas, he used to come several times. He came to South Africa when we went to India, and he lived in Phoenix, not with his family, but alone, to look after the press. And his daughter was the same age as me. She also did a matric, and he was trying to dissuade her to, do this. So both of us stayed in the ashram, and we started our education there. We had somebody teaching us maths and science, further, because there were professors and things that had given up everything and staying in the ashram. So we were not neglected as such. We had literary studies as well for a few hours in the morning. Then we went into the farms, cottage industries. We learned to spin. We learned to weave. Then I learned the spinning wheel. And during that time, it was a very crucial time. It was 46, and the war was just over in 45, and so they started talking. So ashram was very busy with foreign visitors, and everybody who came visiting, they used to talk to my grandfather when he used to take his walks, and so we got to meet a lot of people then. So I was very fortunate in that I was at a crucial time in Sevagram, and where I met a lot of people, foreign people, all the leaders that came met with my grandfather. We had all the revolutionary people who believed in the violent overthrow of the country. One was Subhash Chandra Bose. He formed the Indian National Army. When Japan was in Singapore, they joined the Indian National Army. Most Indian Army people made the Indian National Army, and they, fought for freedom, thinking that Japan is going to help them through Singapore to overthrow. And it was a very, all young people believed in that. It was very hard to believe that you can go to prison and suffer sentences and that's going to make you free. So most of us, like all of us, we believed that if we join up, we will do more good. So my grandfather, we told him, we'd like to join up. He said, you're going to get another foreign power to take over in this country. Nothing is solved with violence. And it proved that, Japan lost the war. And Japan's sole intention was to help the Indian Army and take over India. So those people were tried, and British government was still in India. So there was a big treason trial. And like Pandit Nehru and all were lawyers, and they fought the case for them. And the charges were dropped against them. So all those things were going on. And very important people we met. And then he went to Simla, where the British Cabinet Mission came to meet him. And there's a conference there. And he took me with him. And that's when I had heard that, when you travel by train, people stood at the stations where the train passed those stations, just to see the train, because you couldn't see him. though if the train stopped, he would always open the window and greet, except the first few rows. Way down, people would stand for hours just to see the train. And I had that experience when I traveled with my grandfather, as what people worshipped him. And I had to see how they felt about Nehru. Nehru was the people's hero. When they saw Pandit Nehru, they would just, mob him and carry him and put him on their shoulders and hero worship him. But they were in awe of my grandfather. Silence, millions of people, but silence. They wouldn't question him. What are you doing? That the kind of feeling that he aroused in people. And I saw all that, and I didn't regret it. That 1 year I spent, all these things happened during that 1 year. And then the 1 year was over, and universities were opened, and he asked us both, have you made up your mind? So still I had this nagging feeling that I couldn't live my life like this, I had to go to university. My cousin also decided the same thing. And I wanted to fulfill my father's wish. He wanted to be a doctor. So I told my grandfather that I think I want to study further. And I think my father wants me to study further. So I want to please him as well and please myself. So both of us went to Banaras Hindu University. My cousin took up arts and I took science. And that was in 46. And 47, just before freedom, I contracted malaria. I had recurring malaria every time I, was sent home for having these violent attacks of malaria fever, and then from that I got jaundice, so they told me that I must stay at home. And so I stayed with my maternal uncle, and that's when I had to leave Banaras and attend a college there. So there was no science college where I attended college where my uncle stayed. There was an arts college only. It was a small town. So I went to the arts college, and that's when one day, it was the heart of anti-Gandhi, the town that my uncle stayed in, the heart of anti-Gandhi feelings. So every day, again, like during the war, I used to hear how wicked my grandfather is and selling the country to the Muslims and all that, Those are the type of students I met. And one day I was coming home on the bicycle, and everybody was very happy. The students, they spoke another vernacular that I didn't understand. I learned the Hindi, but I didn't learn the Marathi. They spoke Marathi, and they said something about Gandhi, and they were very happy. So I was just wondering what has happened. And I was going on the bicycle, and then I saw a lot of people standing by my uncle's house, and I just came home and I said, what's going on? And then my uncle said that your grandfather's been shot. And people were very happy in the streets, and people were shocked, all the Gandhian people, because they never expected that. Just immediately after freedom. So after he died, I just felt, and my father felt, that I couldn't stay there anymore. I wanted to come back home. Like I had a lot of relatives, I could have continued my studies there, but I never missed my parents when my grandfather was there. He made up for everything. Somehow he made up, the little time he gave you, it covered up for all that. A lot of youngsters were like me. But the minute he went from even the ashram was like everybody was depressed in the ashram, like a soul force was gone. So when he died, this is what happened to the country. And then the violent racial attacks and, in racial disharmony, Hindu-Muslim. And with the university that I went to, so many of my friends got involved. They were living in Pakistan and they had to come to India. Some are living in India and had to go to Pakistan. And I didn't even know what had happened to them. Lost all contact with them. So I wanted to come home. So I wrote to my father and I said, it's time for me to come home. The only unfortunate part, when I went to Bombay, they told me my passport had expired. And you see, I had no birthright over here. I was born here, but your mother has to be resident 3 years if she was from India, 3 years in South Africa before she had a child. Then you would have a birthright. So I didn't have a birthright. And it slipped our minds that, every 3 years we should have sent a copy of the certificate that I'm studying there. I'm not gone there for good. So we didn't send a certificate, and renew my passport. So when I wanted to come, my passport had expired and they said she lost her rights and she can't come back. And I was very depressed. That's all I needed. And I was staying in Bombay and I didn't know what to do. And, there were no phones at that time that you can just, everything was by letter and telegrams and things. And when my father heard that, so he was also very upset and he said he tried to do things to the immigration, but immigration, no is no, she lost her rights and that's it. So he said the only way I can do it is, he had a good relationship with General Smuts, starting from those days when my grandfather was there. And it was carried on, though he wrote against General Smuts and everything, but the relationship was there. So he phoned him and he said, I want to come and see you. So he gave him an interview. And my father flew to Johannesburg, Pretoria, and he went and met him. And he said, this is my problem. I left my daughter there to get to know her grandfather, and I didn't realize that she has no birthright over here. So she lost her rights. So he says, no problem. Just wrote a note, and I got my passport. In 10 days, I prepared to, take the ship back home. And after 5 years, I was coming back home. And we came to Mombasa. And in Mombasa, we heard the National Party had won the elections, and General Smuts was out. 10 days. It took the 10 crucial days, otherwise the National Party would not have given me. They were bent upon sending us back. They wouldn't have given me, they wouldn't have given my father an interview or, to listen to his problems. So it took that 10 days after my grandfather died, the 10 crucial days when I got my passport. And when I went, every British person was very upset that the British lost and Afrikaners were in. And I just thanked my lucky stars that I got my passport before then. And then I came back, and I was very happy to come back, but I wanted to study. But then they didn't want to recognize my Indian qualifications.
And you returned to Phoenix Settlement.
Yeah. And so they told me that you have to go to school again. I said, no ways am I going to school. I can, do one exam, make me write an exam for something. But I'm not going to do my matric all over again. I can't do that. So, Mabel Palmer was the principal of the Natal University. She was a liberal white, but, a law is a law, and Indian things were not recognized there. And that's no is no. So then I decided that I should help my father then in the press. So I took over the whole office work. I became like his private secretary, he wanted my brother to do that, but my brother was not very keen to do it. At still going to school and all that, But I was very keen to do it, and I just took all that over, running of the office, circulation, and I involved myself in that till I got married. And even when I got married and my father got sick, I went back to help to run the press while my father was ill. And when he died, I helped my mother to run the press for the next 1.5 years. And then my brother went to India to learn the trade, from my uncle who was the editor of the Hindustan Times. And she sent him there, and he also went to immerse my father's ashes in the Ganges River. And instead of that, he met a girl and he wanted to marry her in India. And Mr. Rastamji told my mother that no problem, we'll speak to the government and we'll bring his wife here. And so we said okay. And then he got married and he couldn't bring her. So he just had to stay in India. And so then we decided to close the press down, because the press was, if it went into wrong hands, it would be, founded by Mahatma Gandhi, but it would not have been run exactly according to the principles of Gandhi, that we knew. Because of the number of people who came in to help us during my father's illness and later, we said that the editorial policy would completely gone. And my grandfather had said that if you can't run it on those principles, then you must shut the press down. So we took that decision. We shut the press down in 1959-60. And then my mother just ran the farm and continued to run the farm. This lady who was here when you came, she was a teacher at Inanda's school, the Kasturba school. And she stayed with my mother when we were married. I was married already, but Ela got married, and she was staying in Durban. And she took a job as a teacher in the Kasturba school, and she lived with my mother for many years. And so my mother ran the farm, and she continued to run the farm and her book selling, the vernacular book selling. And many people came to Phoenix Settlement to visit it, because in my parents' day, Phoenix Settlement was the place where everybody went. All the high commissioners, everything, and all the pictures are gone. All the pictures were in Phoenix, when all the Indian high commissioners were here, and they all came to Phoenix. And my father, he was a very sociable person as well, so he entertained all of them. And that record is gone now. You don't even have a picture to say that these people were here. Even the local freedom struggle was taking place, and Dadu and all those people, they had no venue to have their meetings. They had their meetings in Phoenix Settlement. But Ismail Mir writes in the Reader, but he never mentions Phoenix Settlement, like nothing happened on Phoenix Settlement. And I remember Dadu and Naika and even Mr. Mir. He was he didn't say it, but he was a Communist Party member, and they had their meetings on Phoenix Settlement. And my father had a good, close relationship with Dr. Dadu. We went to Joburg and we stayed with him in his house. And he came and stayed with us in Phoenix. But the policy was, my father still believed in the policy of my grandfather, that every organization must run complete truth, complete honesty, And if you are not above those things, then how can you lead people? And the local leaders didn't believe in all those things, you know. They actually laughed at my father that he's just trying to imitate my grandfather. That was okay, good enough for my grandfather. But it was not only good enough for my grandfather, because all the leaders who worked with him, you know, went to prison with him, like Nehru and all the others, all of them were tried and, you know, by the same live in. Nehru came from a very wealthy family, but he, you know, lived like an ordinary man, simplicity, truth. And my father tried to say that we have to look, that we have to make ourselves above reproach, you know, so we can lead people. And that's the biggest downfall for us today when we see all this violence here, because who have we got to say that, you know, live like me? You have to have that principle. That's the principle my grandfather said, that if you live the life of truth and non-violence and everything, then you can inspire the opposite person to live like that as well. But if you don't practice it in your life, then how can you lead somebody else to do it? You cannot say that do what I say and don't do what I do.
Okay, do you want to pick it up?
Okay.
Carry on. Let's do it.
You still want to know about my sister? She qualified as a social worker, and she was with the Child Welfare Society for many years. And my brother-in-law just had an ordinary BA, but he had an insurance business running in Berlin. And that's how when they came and stayed in Phoenix with my mother, because, you know, my mother felt they were better off in Phoenix while they were under house arrest and all. So it wasn't so bad for the children. Phoenix was a big place and many people could go there. And, you know, the children would mix with them. They were not allowed to talk to people, like, you know, unless they were on that list. But so they stayed there, and that's when my brother-in-law at one stage was a member of the Black Power, you know, with Sats Cooper and all that. And then he revived the Natal Indian Congress.
Right. Now your uncles, there's Harilal, Ramdas and Devdas.
Yeah.
They returned to India with your grandfather.
Harilal returned to India. He was mad with my grandfather and he went away.
Earlier, right.
He was married at the time when he was here. And my grandfather refused to bring his wife here. He said, how will we support her because he's not working? So he was here and he went to prison many times. You know, he was a very active politician and he enjoyed, he gave the prison officials a rough time. He enjoyed it. He escaped from prison a number of times. But this thing that my grandfather didn't let him study. And once when he was given a scholarship for his children by one of his rich friends, he gave that scholarship to somebody else. And Harilal questioned him about that. I wanted to study and I wanted to have done something. Why didn't you give it to me?
Can we just hold it there, Serena? I just want to change the battery. Are you ready? Okay, action.
So Harilal was the eldest.
Sorry, can we just start with the question?
Okay.
Did you have any contact with Harilal?
Yes, I met him just before he died because his daughter, his youngest daughter, was married to my maternal uncle, my mother's brother. And so, now and then he would come there, because after my grandfather went to India, he still had many, didn't agree with about many things. And finally my grandfather disowned him publicly. To be disowned by such a great man, and then nobody wants to know you. Not even the relatives will talk to him. So he just went out of our life completely. The children felt it. The children were brought up by my grandmother and their maternal grandmother as well. And when they were married, and he would just pitch up one day, and my uncle and the other sister's husband were very nice men, and they wanted him to stay with them. But the minute he had money, he started drinking. And so I met him that one visit that he paid my uncle just before I came to South Africa. And
which uncle was this?
This Harila.
Oh. No, I mean, which uncle did he visit?
No, he visited his daughter. His daughter was my auntie as well.
Right, right.
My maternal. Mm-hmm. So my maternal uncle
right.
in Bombay. And he was visiting them, and I found him to be a very nice old man at that time, and he was very sober, and he wasn't wild, and I suppose life had taught him many lessons, and he never reconciled with mother or father, never saw them again. And so, I had a long chat with him, and my uncle always used to tell him that, stay with us, we'll give you everything, you have a home with us. But he would just disappear. That one day I had a chat with him, and then the second day when I went to my uncle's house, that's his daughter's house, and he had disappeared, and nobody knew where he was. And then just after 2-3 months, I think somebody phoned them that his body was found in the street.
And how much contact did you have with
Now,
Ramdas?
I had a lot of contact with Ramdas because he came to South Africa as an adult. He came about 2-3 times to relieve my father. My father used to go to India, visit his parents, and every time my father went, he came. About 3 times he came and looked after the Phoenix settlement. So that way we got to know him well. And then when I went to India, his daughter and I were the same age. So both of us had stayed 1 year with my grandfather. We gave it 1 year that we wouldn't go to university and give the cottage industries and things a chance. So she also didn't like it much at that time. It was beginning and we felt that we were wasting our time. And so she went and became a judge. And she was a member of parliament during Indira Gandhi's government. Now she's retired. And so till I went to India in 1961. That's the last time I saw him. That time he was staying in Sevagram Ashram. His wife is still alive. She's the only senior member in the family who's alive. And both of them stayed in Sevagram Ashram after the children got married, and they went and stayed in the ashram in the cottage. And my husband and my children and I visited him. And he was very happy because he was alone. I think his wife had gone somewhere, and he actually prepared a lunch for us. And he was so overcome. He was very, very mild-tempered, and he never got angry, and he had a mediocre job. He was, I think, a manager of, like Lever Brothers, somebody who made soaps and for all his life. So he not a big earner or anything. He also had no education. And when Ela got married, she got married in India, and he performed the wedding. Because, in our people, a widow can't perform the wedding, and my mother was a widow. So his wife and he performed Ela's wedding. She's very fortunate.
And then there was Devdas.
Now, Devdas was the youngest. So he got away with many things. He got educated, and he became the editor of a very well-known paper, Hindustan Times. And then he got married to the first president of India, not Governor General. He was the first and the last Governor General of India, Indian. And he got married to her daughter. So he lived in luxury, and he didn't believe in living, though he believed in my grandfather, but he believed in living his life to the full. So he became, just before he died very young. Just after a year after my father died, he died. And he became the World Editors Conference chairman before he died.
Sorry, just hold the picture flat so we can see it.
Okay.
No, we'll take a picture of just now, but when you hold it, yeah, that's fine.
So he lived in style, with servants and cars and everything. Actually, my grandfather used to tease my mother that she's living in style in Phoenix, though we had servants because we had to have farming people and the press people. So they all lived on the farm. But we had to do certain things, like cleaning the toilets. My father insisted that my brother Arun and I clean the toilets every morning. He said, that nobody's going to do for you. And once a day, like evening, the servant just stayed next to us, and the girl was prepared to come and, wash the dishes. So he said, no, that you must do. So my brother was well versed in household duties as well, because on a Friday, Friday was a day off for the press, and we devoted the time to the house. And so the house was polished, and my father had a fetish for cleanliness. Everything had to be brassoed, every brass thing had to have brasso. Every window had to be clean, all the floors had to be polished. So my brother and I he did the polishing and I did the brasso. And it's quite a lot because we had lamps at that stage, big brass lamps.
Was there any contact between Devdas and your father, Manilal?
Yes. Whenever he went to India, he went and stayed with my father. They were very close. All the brothers, the three brothers, were very close. They wanted to be close with the eldest brother as well, and my father got into trouble for that when he went once and gave some money to him, and my grandfather found out and he punished him for that. For a year he sent him away to a completely unknown place with no skills whatsoever. He was 16 then. And he said, why did you give him the money? I gave you the money to spend. He sent him to India. And he said, I didn't need this money, so you gave it to me, and I gave it to my brother, because he had a couple of children at that time, and he was battling. He was really battling. And so he gave him, so my grandfather punished him for a year. He said, I'm giving you a ticket to Madras, where he was unknown. He knew nothing. He had no skills. And you must make your way for a year and think about what you did wrong, and then come back on your own steam. And he did that.
And he actually went away for a year?
Yeah, for a year. At the age of 16, unknown people, we don't know what he did. He did anything and everything that came to survive. Because he didn't give him money, he just bought him a ticket to go to Madras. And he said, in that 1 year you must have money to buy a ticket to come back. So then they had no contact with my eldest uncle, but the three brothers got on very well. Every time my father went to India, he spent some time with the two brothers.
Now this photograph was taken in India. And,
Yes, this photograph was taken when my father came to leave me in India in 1945, just before the war ended, just about 6 months before the war ended. And this is my father. You see. And that's my grandfather's secretary. And this is my cousin-in-law, and that's my nephew, actually, my grandfather's nephew. He always lived with my grandfather. And she was a Bengali. I think she had no mother, so her father left her with my grandfather. And she grew up, and then she did everything. So she was with my grandfather when he died. And she was responsible for his preparation of food, his timing, his diary, everything, And she died just recently when I went to India now. I wanted to see her, and I heard that she died in June, and I went in October. And this is his secretary, and this is, we had a High Commissioner in South Africa, so Maharat Singh, the first one. I showed you the cricket team,
yes.
He and his wife. This is his sister. She's actually a princess, and she gave up everything, and she lived with my grandfather in the ashram. And this is the evening walk that we are taking, and that's my father there. And that's the last time we saw him. Because after that he came back and never went back. In 48 he died.
Now this is a photograph of the Gandhi descendants.
Yeah, well, this is a very, you could say this is a recent photograph. Recent means about 30 years. But this is my brother Arun. He was married. And this is his wife. And this is his son and his daughter. And this is my brother-in-law and Ela and her children, 1, 2, 3, and 4. No, 1, 2, 3, and 3 children. And the twins were the last born. And this son, the second son, this is the eldest son. No, this son is the eldest son, and this is the second son.
Right. Could you just give us their names? The
Kedar. Kedar was the eldest son,
right.
And then was Kush. And Kush was the one who got killed a couple of years ago in Berlin. Was shot. And then the little girl was... I don't think the little girl was born. I think she was pregnant at the time, as you see. And then she had 3 girls. Asha and Aarti and Ashish.
Right.
And my brother's son is Tushar, this fellow here, and Archana, she's the girl. And his wife's name is Sunanda. And my husband there.
Could you tell us a bit
Satish.
about your husband, his
Yeah,
background?
my husband was a thorough businessman. No politics. He was completely in business. I think in his younger days, when he was at the tech or something, he participated in the student activities and his passport was refused for some time. But then when we got married, he was a complete businessman. He had a business, soft goods, in Bond Street for many years. Imported soft goods and sold it. And then he went into the sari business. Then he closed the business and he did it like hawking. He had his customers and he went and bought stuff from India and sold it here till he died. The year that he died, he was supposed to be going to India for the last time to buy and to see my daughter. And he was going to take me, and 10 days before that he died in Ladysmith. He's on his way back from Johannesburg. He traveled quite a lot. He hardly spent a week, you could say a week or 10 days in a month spent at home.
In what year did you marry?
I married in 1954.
Right, and then moved out of Phoenix settlement.
Yeah, but I still went to help because in 55 my father got sick. In 56 he died. So then I went up and down. After he died, I went regularly to Phoenix and helped my mother. Because before I got married, I was helping in all the office work in the Indian Opinion. I did the subscribers, and we had to handwrite every subscriber's, wrapping, and then we had to wrap it by hand, homemade glue and all that, very primitive, not like today. So we had to handwrite everybody's name. So all that I did, and then I looked after my father's correspondence as well. And then at one stage he felt that he could leave me in charge and go. So in 49 he went to a World Peace Conference in India. And then also some people sent him to the United Nations to state our question. So he made those 2 trips to India once and to the United Nations, America. And all during that time I looked after the paper. But we had somebody who wrote the editorial. Mr. Rich was still alive. He kept in. Out of all my grandfather's friends, like Polak and West, I never met them at all. None of his families too, because I think they went away to London and all that. They just broke contact. But Mr. Rich was the only person who kept in touch with us. He was partly an invalid, bedridden, but he used to write for us for many years. If at any time my father was not able to write an editorial, he would write it. And Miss Lazine, his secretary, she kept in touch with us. She became a teacher after my grandfather went, and she was a teacher in Johannesburg. But every holiday she came to Phoenix, and so we were in close touch with her.
And could you tell us a little about your children?
My children? Yeah, well, Satish, as you know, he's in the video business. But all my 3 children went into the education field when they educated. Satish became a teacher. And then there's Uma, who is a lecturer.
Right. Satish is the eldest.
Satish is the eldest, and Uma is the second. She became a lecturer in history in UDW. She studied in UDW, and she became a lecturer at UDW. And the youngest one, Kirti, she studied in India. She twisted her father's mind and said she wanted to go to boarding school and go to India, so she did all the high school till matric. She studied in India, and after matric she came here and did a degree at Westville, and she did her honors in Cape Town University, and then she became a lecturer as well in English at UDW, but she couldn't settle here, so she packed her bags and went off to India and told her dad that I'll manage. I've got education and don't worry. So for a few months she helped my brother because my brother had started a paper. He left Times of India because he was stagnant in Times of India. In 24 years he never once got promoted to anything else but what way he was. So he started his own paper, and my daughter Kirti helped him with the paper. And then she also found a job with another magazine. So that's what she was doing when my husband died. And then Satish taught for many years in Gandhi Desai, Porchepston, and Claywood High. And for the last 8 or 9 years, he's given up teaching. I think he got frustrated with the Indian education was becoming not a pleasant thing, under the Indian affairs. And so he decided to give it up. He always had a hobby of photography. He always went around with cameras when he was a little boy. And then in his teens, while he was studying, he did wedding photographs of his friends and, made little pocket money that way. And that he continued when he was a teacher. But then he decided that I can't take teaching anymore because he was a very dedicated teacher. His students still come and tell him that how much they missed him. And for some time, all his students helped him. Now he's got a girl who's full-time. But when he started his video business, all his school children came and helped him, about 3 or 4. And they learned the video business as well. In the weekends, then he used to work weekends mostly. But now it's a full-time business. He's got no time. We rarely see him. So Rihanna, his assistant, she just did a matric and he put in an advertisement for a full-time person. And she was the only candidate that wanted nothing but to learn the job. And she's learned it fully now. He can leave her, like he went to America for 10 days. And she ran the whole show on her own. She was very competent and very dedicated. My other 2 girls, as I said, after they got married, my youngest one came back when she got married. She came back to South Africa to have a baby. And now she's also a lecturer in Johannesburg. And my Uma, the second one, she's a lecturer in Western Cape. And my son-in-law is a lecturer in UCT. He's professor of linguistics. And she's majored in history.
distortion.
Okay, now I want to focus just a little on Phoenix settlement. I've got some photographs of, for example, that's Sarvodaya.
Yeah, this is Sarvodaya, as it used to be. That's the front of the Sarvodaya.
Okay, and that's the house that your grandfather lived in.
Yeah. You see, we lived in here up till Ela was born. And now we extended it. We had a closed veranda right around it. And, built another extra kitchen and all that. But we lived in the same main house. And then it was wood and tin. So, white ants and all started eating it up. And so Mr. Kallenbach was alive then. So he said that you should build a cement block house, that will not cost you so much. You make the cement blocks at home. So he taught some of our staff to make cement blocks, and he made the plans of the house that is the late house that my father lived in, and he actually built it. Mr. Kallenbach. And we rebuilt this house with donations from people from Johannesburg, and we rebuilt it as it was. And we kept it as a museum. His books were there, his photographs were there, and every evening we had prayers there. And later, after I got married, he had a little school running there for little children and adults, adult education. So till he built his own school, Kasturba School. That also was destroyed. It's a good picture.
This is the rebuilt Sarvodaya, the house that Kallenbach.
Yeah, this is the house. This is Kasturbuvan,
Right.
named after my grandmother. And this is the house that Kallenbach planned and built. And he planned it very well, because there were lots of snakes in Phoenix. And got into the house, and also he made these half doors, that you can leave the top half open and the bottom half remained closed so the snakes don't get in.
And that is the school that was named after your grandmother.
This is not the main part. This is the extension that we built later because we had a number of classes. So the main part was here. And that was also, it's in his trust. I gave you a copy of the trust.
Yes,
yeah.
yes. Right.
It's in his trust deed that later he must build a school and name it after my grandmother. So my father did that. I think that's the last thing he did before he died. He built the school and he named it after my grandmother, and the school was thriving. And this is my mother, the principal of the school.
Okay, and that is your grandfather's lamp.
Yes. We don't know what happened to this is one of the lamps. But we had hanging lamps, real brass, heavy brass hanging lamps. It gave us good light. I mean, we never suffered from lighting. And later on, one of my father's friend gave him, bought him a motor for light, run by battery. And so we got electric lights all over the place. that was donated. He was a trustee as well, and he was my father's very close friend, Mr. Chowda. And he stayed in Cape Town, and he was a trustee till he died. He died about 2 years ago. And he had a great feeling for my father. And he said, you know, you're living with lamps and working under lamps and everything. Let me buy you this motor that you can run it, you know, you can charge it. As it runs, you get light. So we had electric lights everywhere then. So at that time, I don't know where the other brass lamps went. I think this lamp was saved by Fatima Mir after the house was destroyed. And this is a spinning wheel that my mother was spinning on.
Okay, and action?
Now this is your grandfather's chair and table at
Yeah.
Phoenix Settlement.
But I don't remember it because I think it wasn't in my time. It was long before then. Afterwards, my father had a big desk, and he used to like standing and working. So this big desk held all his private papers, and he stood there and read, you know, his proofreading and all that.
And then this is a
This,
photograph of your grandfather's study. Now I believe this was part of the museum that was built at Phoenix
Yeah.
Settlement.
but this is part of the study as it was in India. That's how my grandfather sat, on a little mattress and cushion at the back and a little desk in the front. And this is actually remodeled from his house in Sevagram.
Oh, right.
He never used it here like this. I mean, here he was still a gentleman, you know, using tables and chairs and all that. But in Sevagram, that's how it is. It's still there in his cottage.
Okay, and this is the new library and the museum.
Yeah, this is the museum that still exists. I think somebody told me, a French girl who came just 3 days ago, last week I think, when was this Fatima Mir's thing? She came that day, so she came with me. And she's an ambassador's daughter. Her father's an ambassador in Lusaka, but she's a student. I think she came to the Kwamushle. Diana, her name is, I forget the surname, too difficult. And she was very thrilled to come, and Nelson Mandela shook her hands, and, you know, she was very pleased. What I was saying is, we were talking about this museum. This museum was built in 1969 by donated money from Harry Oppenheimer and Anson Lloyd of the Sugar Estate. And it still stands there. This is what Diana told me, that when she went to Phoenix, there's a shebeen running there. This building is not destroyed. It's still there.
Right. And this photograph, I believe, was taken shortly after
Just
the
after
burning
that
down of the
is
settlement.
much more destroyed now. You know, even this part is destroyed, and they've built little huts inside the building. What is remaining is the step ladder and the roof garden. We had a roof garden on top, and that's what's remaining. This was immediately after it was burnt, so nobody was staying there. Now they are staying everywhere.
Right, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
We'll stop there.
Okay.
I'll tell you. Again, action.
Right, could you tell us a little about the Phoenix Settlement Trustees?
Yeah. You see, my father and Mr. Kallenbeck and Mr. Rastamji and he were only the trustees. Then one of the elder Mr. Rastamji died. Then his brother took over, Sorabji Rastamji. And then when my father got ill, so he made a new trust incorporating my brother and his son, Dr. Rustam, also deceased, and the other brother's son, Dr. Jinwala's husband, is Mr. Rustamji, and he was a trustee. And for some reason or the other, they all resigned. And then my brother went to India. So then Mewa was never a trustee, but he made a working committee. Actually, he made a working committee for this 1969 thing. But gradually everybody left the working committee except Ismail Mir. And he was chairman of the working committee.
Right. Who are the people on the working committee apart
As
from...
far as I know, it was Alan Payton, Pat Purlingam, Ismail Mir, Mewa, my mother, and I don't know if there were, I think maybe Dr. Durga Prasad, Gary Durga Prasad. That's the only people I know. And they all eventually left, Mr. Payton and everything. But my brother is now the sole surviving trustee. And after he went from Bombay, he was invited to America. And so he decided to set up a Gandhi Institute in a Christian Brothers College, it's called, in Memphis. And they gave him, he had to raise the money initially. Now he's running on his own, and he's got books and literature, and he goes about lecturing, and spreading the word about my grandfather. So this is the work that he's doing, and he's very happy there. He came once here about 2 years ago for 2 weeks. He was invited by Catlong squatters to the United States Information Service. So he came and he spoke to them about non-violence, and they were very taken up, and they didn't want to let him go, because I went to Johannesburg with him, and at the airport they were begging him to stay back. But I think he's well settled there. He would like to come and visit here. He wanted to do this here, this institute here. After Phoenix got burnt, he said we'll do it with the Natal University. He spoke to the Natal University rector as well. And what was his name now? He died a couple of years ago. Colin Webb, yeah. And so Mewa hinted that he's got nothing to do with it, and then Colin Webb thought that it was a family feud that was going on because he put it in the papers. I explained to him that it's not a family feud, and this is a good chance to, promote non-violence, Gandhi's teachings at a university, what he's doing in America now. And he said, I don't want to be part of it. Then his secretary told me that he's actually dying, so it's useless talking to him. And by that time my brother was very because he agreed to do it. And then because Mewa put it in the papers that he's not part and parcel of it, Ela and I both said that we are not, with what Mewa said. But he made it out like it's family feud and Collins said, I don't want to have anything to do with it. So then he decided to build it in, and it's a very good institute. I saw the video.
Now, I've heard mention of Richard Steele as one of the people who actually
He
became
went and
a
stayed
settler
there
at a later stage.
just before Phoenix got burned down. There was nobody there, and so I think Richard Steele got friendly with my brother-in-law, and I think working in Diaconia, and he went and stayed there. But just before Phoenix settlement was burned down, he left. He didn't stay very long. That's when I brought this bag, and he told me that I couldn't take the bag. So I said, I'm not taking anything of my grandfather's possessions. I'm taking my father's possessions. That's a different thing. And that bag belonged to my father. And it just as well had a lot of, I didn't know what was in the, I just saw it thrown in one corner in the museum. And I was upset with the state of the museum. And the Killy Campbell librarian told me that they had told them over time and over again that they should treat the books. And that's where you got my grandmother's blouse or something, you know.
Right.
That's how you got it. Otherwise that would have been burnt down as well, or destroyed. So Richard Steele was for 1 or 2 years, I think, just before it got burnt. The time that it was burnt, he was not there. I think he left there. So the sole trustee is now my brother and Mr. Rustamji, who had resigned because he had differences with Mewa, and he resigned, but we realized that his resignation wasn't accepted, so he is still a trustee. So other day when he was here in South Africa, you know, I told him that why don't you give your powers to somebody so something can be done legally, you know. I mean, those people can't do anything legally in Phoenix because nobody has got any legal rights. And so he said, legally, I'm not going to spoil my name as a trustee and give power to somebody who couldn't look after the place. That's what happened to the place. So what are they going to look after it afterwards? So I'm not interested in giving my power. I had actually resigned. They didn't accept my resignation. That's too bad. But Arun is the trustee. And I think he's given my son and Ila power of attorney. But he's got special ideas about it, Phoenix. Now, there's two thoughts in Phoenix, you know. My brother-in-law is making them more solid. You know, for 10 years, it should have been immediately done to remove these people, you know. Now they've got houses better than we are living. And they're going to get water and light, and how are you going to remove them? They're well maintained now. The roads have been made properly. So Mewa is working towards that. It's his constituency. Now you see, when MPs are involved, everything is their constituency, and they're pleasing the constituency and not doing the actual job.
You mentioned that there were two thoughts. What's the other thought? What's the other set of ideas?
The other set of ideas, Satish and Ila and all want to resettle the squatters somewhere else and rebuild this memorial and run it like an institution. I mean, when they take people there, what do you see? You don't see anything except ruins. because the ruins are there. And that's a reflection on us that we couldn't preserve the two institutes. One is Tolstoy Farm and one is this. Tolstoy Farm was also 100 acres of land. It's almost taken by the industry. No squatters were there, but the industry took the land. And now it's only the house that is still standing, and they're doing nothing about it. The committee, every time somebody suggests, let's do something about about the building and maintain it, rebuild it and make it strong, because it's the original house. And they take objection now. My daughter is involved with that, Kirti, who's a lecturer in Johannesburg. And she's starting the young people to take over from the older people and start schools or something and maintain that place before that house goes away. And then there's nothing to show.
Right. Okay, thank you, Mrs. Patel.
That's great.
I thought I'd get a bout of coughing, because I still got that cough after.
Okay, and a bit of a laugh. That's nice smile. Let's see, that's it. Go on, don't need to shine. Let's see a smile. That's it. Okay. And then you're just sitting there still, just listening to it.